Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I recognize lots of Park County youth and a few youth that came last week to level 1 from other areas, and there are a few new faces. If you have not already, please sign into the chat box, and I'll be sure to let your 4-H educator know that you are on. And for Park County youth, to get credit for coming tonight, please sign into the chat box so we can put it in your records that you were here. We're going to go ahead and get started. There may be a few more people that pop on, but that's all right. We'll go ahead and start YQA Level 2. All right, so we're going to start with the 6 pillars of character. Who knows some of the 6 pillars of character? Does anybody know one of the 6 pillars of character?
Responsibility.
Good. Responsibility is one of them. What's another one? Respect, caring. Good. I see them in the chat box up there. Okay, so the pillars of character are a good foundation for choosing to raise quality livestock. So we're going to start there. The next slide has a few scenarios of how we can use the six pillars of character in our 4-H livestock projects. So we want to be trustworthy in our projects and show the animals that we raised and trained, that we follow the rules of the competition, and that we only use approved products for the show, and that we always enter and show the same animals in the correct classes. Now, sometimes we might accidentally enter an animal in the wrong class, or we might think we're entering it in the right class, and that's okay as long as we're not purposely entering an animal in the wrong class. Can anybody tell me how they can be fair in raising their animals? How can you demonstrate fairness in your 4-H project?
Shaking the judge's hand.
That's a good way to show some good character. How else can you show good character?
Follow the rules. Congratulate the winners.
Good. Definitely congratulate the winners. How else can you show good character?
Don't be a sore loser.
Good. Yeah, don't be a sore loser. Those are all great examples. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about character, good. Jordan says help people who need it. We're going to talk for just a second about what quality assurance is. So we want to make a promise or a pledge to the people who might buy our animals that we are doing everything we can to make sure that the product they are getting is safe and healthy to eat and that it is a good product. We're going to make a pledge or a promise that says just this. The food from our livestock will be the highest possible quality, and we will do everything we can to make these products safe to eat. And Park County youth, we will have some little flyers that you can sign and pass out to your buyers saying that you've completed quality assurance, and the flyer has this on it. Why do you think we should have quality assurance?
I think we should have quality insurance because it ensures that we have good meat and good quality animals.
Good. So when we make sure that we are learning the best practices to raise our livestock, we're helping improve the food quality. We're improving the overall care and management of our animals. We're helping to reduce drug residue levels, and we're also increasing the overall product value. Do those things sound like good things?
Yes.
I think so too. So why do you think quality assurance started?
I think it started because people weren't taking good care of their animals and they didn't have good meat.
Good. There were some problems. So, back in the 1980s when this started, a lot of the packing plants were finding injection site lesions in the meat. They were finding drug residues in the meat. They were finding broken needles. And they were also finding bruised carcasses with poor meat quality. And all of these things mean that a piece of that carcass or that entire carcass has to be thrown away or discarded because it's not good to eat. So that is how quality assurance started long, long time ago. Here are a couple pictures of some injection site lesions. So here's, these are where shots were given improperly or in the wrong part of the animal, and they caused some scar tissue. Do those look very appetizing? No, they
No.
sure don't. Not at all. So we want to do what we can to make sure that we don't have injection site lesions or drug residues in our meat. So level 3 talks about how to give a proper injection. So if you want to learn how to do that, come back next week. This week we're going to focus on how to feed our animals and how to house our animals to give proper, to help with meat quality, overall meat quality. So who's responsible? This is right now we're doing a review from level 1. We'll jump into level 2 here in just a couple slides. Who is responsible for the quality of the meat?
You're responsible for the quality of the meat?
Good, we are. Who else is responsible?
The people who take care of your animals when you are gone.
Good. Everybody that has contact with the animal or the meat after it's been processed is responsible, all the way from the producer, which you guys are the producers, right? Garrett says processors, Matthew says butchers. Those are correct. Yep. So everybody that comes into contact with the meat is responsible. This is called the food supply continuum, and you probably fit into more than one spot on this. Oh, we can't see the bottom one. It says harvesting. What areas of this do you fit in?
Producer, transportation, and marketing.
Definitely. What about consumer?
Yes, we do fall in that because we eat the meat.
Yep, exactly. So, and sometimes you may fall into other places depending on if you process your own meat or not. What about food service? Do you guys sometimes cook your own food?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you can potentially fit into all of these different pieces. All right, so as a youth producer, it's important for us to know that the people who buy our meat have the right to expect a safe food supply, and that no matter how many animals you raise, whether it's 1, 100, or 1,000, you are just as responsible to meet that consumer's expectation as any other producer. It's also important to know that as a youth in 4-H, you can have a little bit of an extra spotlight in your livestock program. So if you sell an animal and it has poor meat quality, that can bring some negative publicity to 4-H across the nation as well as the livestock industry. But on the flip side, if we raise really good quality meat, that can have a really positive impact on the livestock industry. So it's super important for us to do our part and to try to avoid drug residues, try to avoid injection site lesions, and to make sure that the quality of our animals is able to meet the consumer's expectations. And it's also good to know that the quality assurance practices aren't just so that you can sell your animals at fair, but they're beneficial to you, the people that are buying the animals from you, as well as to your animals. So your role in quality assurance is to take care of your animals every day, to help prevent illness, to follow safe handling practices, and to make sure that the carcass quality meets consumer expectations, as well as to follow the medication guidelines closely. All right, so this is still a little bit of review from last week, so we're going to go quick. We use identification to help show proof of ownership, to keep good records, and help with management as far as figuring out average daily gain, weaning weights, or other records that you may need to keep. There's two types of identification. There's permanent and temporary. The top row are all permanent and the bottom row are temporary. And then there's also electronic identification, and oftentimes that's in an ear tag. And in Wyoming, we use RFID tags, which is a form of an electronic identification. Okay, so we're going to talk today a lot about feeding. We want to make sure that we read the label, that we use a high quality feed, and that we offer plenty of fresh, clean water. What are some things that you guys think are on a feed label?
What's in the feed?
What's in the feed? Good. What else?
Like
How much protein?
iron and stuff.
Yep, it'll have how much to feed. It'll have if there's protein in it, how much protein. It'll have if there's iron in it. It'll have the fat content. Good. So it will have a list of ingredients, a feed analysis, which will break down the amount of crude protein, the amount of fat, the amount of fiber, as well as the different minerals and vitamins that are in it. It'll tell you how much to feed. And it'll also tell you if the feed is medicated. And if the feed is medicated, it'll tell you which animals you can feed that feed to, what medications are in the feed, and what withdrawal times you should follow. So here's this is the feed tag that was on the last slide too. Hopefully it's a little bit easier to see. This is just one example of a feed tag. It'll have the lot number, the product code, the name of the feed, and then ingredients. And this one is medicated. It says medicated right here. And then here's where it gives our warning, and then feeding directions down here. So every feed tag is laid out a little bit differently, but it should have all of these different things on it. So this feed, it's kind of hard to see, but it says that you should not feed to swine within 42 days before slaughter. What does that mean?
That means you do not want to feed this medication or this feed before you butcher it in 43 days.
Good, exactly. So that's our withdrawal date. That gives us a way to figure out how long after we finish feeding this feed we can butcher our animals. So the withdrawal time is the time from when an animal receives a drug to when it can be harvested, and or if it's a dairy cow, when the milk can be used without having any drug residue. What is a drug residue?
Drug residue is when you take a shot and the drugs is still inside the animal.
Good. So the drug residue is a little bit of the medication, whatever it may be, that remains in the animal's body tissues. Okay, so it's also important to use a high quality feed. Why do you think it's important to use a high quality feed?
I think it's important to use a high.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
I think it's important to use a high quality feed because then you get the best results out of your animals.
Good, yes, that's exactly right. I'm going to backstep just a little bit. The Walker family says that if you don't follow the withdrawal time, some of the drug residue can be transferred to the consumer, and that is a very good point. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you're doing withdrawal times, is that if there is any medication in that meat, it can be transferred to the consumer. And so that's why we have withdrawal times out there, so that we know that we're providing a safe product for our consumers to use. We do want to use a high quality feed so that we can help our animals reach their full potential. So we want to make sure that we meet all of their nutritional needs, and different species have different nutritional needs, as well as animals in different types of production modes. So if they're just brand new little babies versus if they're almost ready to be butchered, they have very different nutritional needs. And so it's really important to read the feed label and see what range that feed covers. So if it's for growing animals or finishing animals, or if you're using it for breeding stock, if it's suitable for breeding stock. It's also important to make sure that you are feeding a feed that is clean and free of wire, manure, and mold, and that we properly store our feed. Why do you think it's important to keep your feed in a clean, dry place?
I think it's important because if you leave it outside, it will mold.
It can mold, good. And why should we keep it away from rodents?
Because then they'll eat all your feed.
They'll eat all your feed, yeah. Why else should we keep it away from rodents?
It might make them sick.
It might make them sick, good. So rodents can carry zoonotic diseases, and zoonotic is a big fancy word that means that disease can be passed from one species to another, and so it can possibly cause your animals to get sick. And why shouldn't we feed that is really old?
Because it's probably getting bad and it's starting to get moldy, and you're probably not going to get the best results out of it.
Good. You're probably not going to get the best results out of it because the vitamins and minerals, over time, the vitamins in your feed dissipate, so you don't get the full results of those vitamins. I see a few comments in here, and it's important to keep your feed away from other animals, so that if you have two different species, other animals can't get in your feed, and so your horses can't get in it and get sick. Great comments. Okay, so the most important thing we need to provide for our animals is what?
Water and feed.
Water. Good. Feed is also important, but water is the most essential. Animals can only live 1 to 3 days without water. And if we have a shortage or poor quality water, it can greatly affect their performance. They're not going to want to eat as much, and they're not going to be able to grow to their full potential. We're going to do a little bit of an activity here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a second. And we're going to use some cards as an example to kind of guess how much water different species need. All right, can you all see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got 3 different size cards of buckets. This one, the tan card, is a ½ gallon. The coral card is 1 gallon. And the yellow card is 5 gallons. So how many of each color card do you think a pig will need when it is 80 degrees outside?
I would think that the pig would probably need 2 5-gallon buckets, so probably 10 gallons.
All right, so we've got
15
10 gallons,
gallons.
15 gallons. Any other guesses?
5 gallons.
5 gallons? All
30
good guesses.
gallons.
5. 4.
So the pig actually only needs, sorry, I don't have a microphone, so I have to be on the phone. Makes it a little bit difficult. So the pig actually only needs 1½ gallons of water when it is about 150 pounds. Do you guys think you should provide more water than the animal requires?
More.
Definitely more.
Yes.
Good. Okay. What about a pig that weighs 280 pounds when it's 100 degrees out?
8 gallons.
I would say a
8
5-gallon
gallons?
bucket.
5 gallons? Right on. Yep, you hit it. They need
5 gallons.
approximately 5 gallons. Okay, what about, we're going to do a steer next. What about a steer that weighs just over 1,000 pounds when it is about 90 degrees out?
I would think it's probably going to need around
50.
6.5 gallons.
10 to 15.
50.
Okay, so I'm hearing
10.
10 to 15, 8, 25. Lots of good guesses. It actually needs 4 5-gallon buckets plus 3 1-gallon buckets. It needs
23 gallons.
23 gallons. Good. What about a steer that weighs, let me find the right card, 700 pounds when it's about 50 degrees outside?
I would say 10 gallons.
15.
10, 15, 12, 13. Lots of good guesses.
11.
11, 16.
13.
Good. 13. So it actually only needs 7 gallons at this point. So what do you guys notice about the difference between those two animals? So we had a 700-pound steer when it's 50 degrees and a little over 1,000-pound steer when it's 90 degrees. What are 2 things you notice that are different?
I noticed the weight difference and the heat.
The heat and the weight. Good. So as it gets hotter, they need more water, but also the bigger they get, the more water they need. So it's really important to think about how hot it is outside, and if it's really hot, make sure to give your animals a little bit extra water. We're going to do a couple lambs really quick, and then we'll be done with our water activity. So how much water do you think a 40-pound lamb will need when it's about 50 degrees out?
20.
1.5.
20, 1.5,
3.
4, 1, 2, 8. It only needs a half a gallon. Not very much at all. How much water do you think a lamb that weighs 120 pounds will need when it's about 80 degrees outside?
1.5.
2. 1.5.
1.5,
3.
2. I heard 2. It is 2. They need about 2 gallons. So a general rule of thumb is to provide at least 1 gallon per every 100 pounds of body weight. So if it weighs over 100 pounds, you should provide 2 gallons of water. If it weighs over 200 pounds, you should provide 3 gallons of water, and so on. But it's always better to provide more water than not enough. Do you guys have any questions about watering?
No.
All right, we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. And we're going to talk a little bit about housing. So it's really important to make sure that the pens are big enough that they're not overcrowded. I see a comment, we just give as much water as they want. That is perfect. Free choice water is the best way to water. It's way better to have too much than not enough. So it's important to make sure that we have pens that aren't overcrowded, and we can do this by a few different things. We're going to talk about sizes in just a minute, but we're going to think a little bit about how uncomfortable an overcrowded pen would be. So we all have different sizes of families, but if we had our entire family that had to live in a space that was the size of our bathroom, do you think that would be comfortable or uncomfortable?
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. But if your family can live in the entire house, is that comfortable or uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Very comfortable.
It is much more comfortable because you have more room to spread out. The same goes for our animals. If they're in too tight of a space, they can't get exercise and it is very uncomfortable. So if you do have a smaller pen, it's important to exercise your animals anyways, but it's really important to get them out every day and give them a little bit of exercise so they can stretch their legs and help build muscle. So exercise will build the animal's muscle, and if they can't move, they won't be able to build muscle. It's also important to provide clean, dry bedding and to make sure there are no nails or sharp objects sticking out. And then we also want to make sure to clean our feed bunks and water troughs often. And the last point we want to talk about is making sure that we have a feeder that is the appropriate size for the number and size of our animals. So we're going to talk a little bit about housing needs. And then we'll go back to the feeder sizes. So we want to make sure to protect our animals from extremes. How do you think we can protect our animals from the extreme hot summer sun?
I would put in like a fan or a mister.
A fan or a mister? Good. How else can we protect them?
Shade.
Shade.
Shade. Good. What about from the harsh winter cold and snow?
Give them straw.
Straw. Good.
Make
Have
sure
a
their barn
barn.
is enclosed.
Good. Have an enclosed barn and straw somewhere where they can get out of the snow with warm bedding. Good. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about housing size. So as our animals grow, they're going to need more space. For calves that are about 400, 500, 600 pounds, they need 15 to 20 square yards per an animal. Square yards is a lot of space. How many feet are in a yard?
3.
3. So we need to keep that in mind when we talk about 15 to 20 square yards. And then steers that are 800 to 1,400 pounds need about 20 to 25 square yards per an animal. If we were doing this in person, we do a fun activity where we measure it out, but that's not going to work today because we're all in different spaces. So if you want to do that at home, it's kind of fun to see how big that space will be. So for sheep and goats, we can use a little bit smaller measurement. We're going to use feet instead of yards. And it's also important to think about where we're housing them, if they're inside, if they're in dirt, or if they're on concrete or pavement. So if they're on dirt, they need more room than if they're inside or on pavement. And a general rule of thumb, it's good to have about 10 feet per a head for sheep and goats. For swine, as they grow, they need a lot more space. When they're little babies, they only need about 3 to 4 square feet. But by the time you're ready to take them to fair, they need about 8 square feet each. It's also important to think about your size of your feeder, because if you have 5 steers and you're feeding them out of the same feeder, the toughest steer is going to get the most grain, right? We want to make sure that they all have access to that feed. And then it's also important to think about how many times a day you feed your animals, because that will affect how much space you need in your feeders. So for sheep and goats and pigs fit pretty good into this category too. If you're feeding twice a day and you're limiting their feed, so you measure out their feed twice a day, they need about a foot per an animal. But if you're using a self feeder, which means that you just dump the feed in and they can go to the feed whenever, you need a minimum of a foot, and then you can add about 2 inches per an animal after that. For steers, they need a lot more room. So if you're feeding once a day, for smaller steers, you need almost 2 foot per an animal. And then once they're over about 800 pounds, closer to that 1,000-pound mark, you need over 2 foot of room per each animal. If you're feeding twice a day, that goes down a little bit because you're limiting how much feed you're feeding each time. But 2 foot for cattle is a good general rule of thumb for feeder space. Why is space so important for animals? Why do you guys think it's important for you to have space for your animals?
I think it's important because, like you said earlier, about we can protect them from the weather and so they don't go running all across the country.
Good, so we can keep them contained so they stay where we want them, and so we can keep them from elements. Why else do we need to provide space? Garrett and Jordan both say to let them move around and give them exercise, so they have their own space and can't get to bad things. Good. For their health, yeah, we want to make sure they have enough room that they don't poop in their feeder. That helps a lot. And so that if they so they can lay down, so they can get up. It helps keep them in a good mood. All good things. So we want to make sure that they have enough space that they can lay down, eat, and poop in different areas. Is there anything you can do to your current facilities to help improve the space you have for your animals? Tara says they need space to stretch their legs. They do need space to stretch their legs, just like we do. Why do pens need to be cleared of obstructions and sharp objects?
Part of the reason is that you need to
So
clear up
the animal doesn't.
sharp objects is so that when they lay down, they don't get poked in the stomach.
Good. Anna, I think I saw you with a comment too.
So that they don't get injured.
Good, so they don't get injured. So they don't hurt themselves. Good. So what happens if there are some sharp objects around and your animals run into those objects and get a bruise?
The meat got bruised too, or the meat goes down a little bit.
Good. Yeah, the meat gets bruised too, and then the meat quality goes down. How long do you think it takes for a bruise to heal completely?
3 weeks.
3 weeks? That's a good guess. How? Any other guesses? A month? Good guess. Keep going. 2 months? 3 months. Good. Chase hit it. It's
A month?
3 months. It takes about 90 days for a bruise to heal completely. That's a long time. So if our animals get bruised during the middle of the summer, it's going to be likely that they'll still have a bruise when it's time to butcher our animals. With that, we also want to talk a little bit about safe handling practices. If we are using, especially with pigs, if we're using a stick to move our animals, can we cause a bruise?
If you poke them hard
Yes.
enough, yes.
Yeah, if you hit them hard enough. So it's important that we keep in mind that animals can bruise just like people do, and so we don't want to hit our animals hard. And we also want to make sure that when we're using our sticks, we only use them in certain areas of the body. So we want to use the jowl, which is a good spot to help guide your animals, and then also below the lower 1/3, so below here. Can you guys see this goat? It's kind of hard to see. You want to use your stick on the lower 1/3.
I can see.
You don't want to use it in the meat parts. Oh, good. You can see it? Awesome. So, and we can use it on the pig too. So we want to use the jowl and then below here where we're not going to hurt the meat. The last thing we're going to talk about today is prevention. So preventing problems before they happen helps to keep a better quality carcass. So it's important that your family also knows about quality assurance and why we do it, that we keep proper records, and that each of our animals has some sort of an ID, and that we watch for signs of illness. What are some signs of illness?
Not being as active as they are or they used to be.
Good.
Not wanting to eat their food.
Yep. What are some other signs? What was that?
Snotty noses.
Snotty noses. Good.
Bloating.
Yep. Coughing. Good. Those are all signs of illness. What should you do if your animal has some sort of a sign of illness?
Take them to the vet
Check on it.
immediately.
Take them to the vet, possibly. Who should you ask before you just take your animals straight to the vet?
The person you bought your animal from.
Your parents, and then maybe the person you bought the animal from. And you definitely want to take your animals to the vet if they need it. It's also a good idea to develop a plan and have vaccinations and a feeding schedule, and then to follow quality assurance methods. Before we go to review, who here knows if their animals have been vaccinated or not?
Mine have.
Mine have.
Awesome. Do you know what vaccines they had on what dates?
Before I got mine.
Okay. So it's really good to ask whoever you buy your animals from what medications or vaccines they've had and what vaccines they will need to have still, because you may need to give your animals another vaccine or some dewormer before fair, and you'll want to look at the withdrawal times on those. So if you don't already know, ask whoever you bought your animals from. I see somebody writes it in a book for records. That is exactly what we need to do. And we talk a lot about keeping good records in level 3 and what records you should keep on hand. But before we get there, we need to have an idea of what vaccines they should have and what withdrawal times those vaccines have. So I'm going to challenge you all to find out what vaccines your animals have had and what withdrawal times are on there, and if they need any other vaccines or dewormers before fair. And if you have questions about that, you can write your email in the chat box, and I'll do my best to get back to you in about a week or so. All right, we're going to do a review. This is the portion of the medication that may remain in the animal's body tissue or milk.
Number 3.
Number 3, drug residue. Good. For livestock producers, this means making a promise to consumers.
Number 2.
2, good. Quality assurance. In 4-H, whose job is it to ensure that consumers are receiving a safe product?
All the
4.
All 4.
All of
2
the
and 1.
above. You guys are on it. Which are types of animal identification?
Tail docking.
And
4, 3,
nose
2, and 1.
All of the above. So ear notching is? Oh, nope, not all of the above. 4 is not. Ear notching is, nose printing is, and you can use hair color, but why is it not a good idea to use hair color as the main form of identification?
Because there might be other animals that have that same hair color.
Good. So 1 and 2 are good types of identification. How long can an animal survive without water?
1 to 3
It
days.
Good.
depends on
1 to
how
3
long it
days.
is.
How long can an animal survive without food?
1 week or 1 month.
4 to 8.
1 week, 1 month, 3 days,
4 to 8 days.
4 to 8 days. It actually is 10 to
Number
15
3.
days, about 3 weeks.
Wow.
What is the rule of thumb for water per 100 pounds?
A
Add 1
gallon of
gallon.
water.
Good. 1 gallon of water per every 100 pounds. What does a feed tag tell you?
Feeding instructions, ingredients, all of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above. Good. What should be in a prevention plan?
All the above.
Number 4.
Number 4.
Good. All of the above. Since I am only in 4-H, it is not my responsibility to worry about the meat quality.
Number 2.
False.
False. It is your responsibility. Good job. It is important to have a prevention plan for whoever will be feeding your animals.
True.
True.
Good. That is true. We didn't talk very in depth about prevention plans. I can email you an example of a prevention plan if you would like, but that should include contact information, important contact information, how much you're feeding, what feeds you're feeding to which animals. It should also include where your feed is located
If
and
they
emergency contact numbers. Oh, go ahead,
and
Abigail.
if they're on any medication.
And if they're on any medication. Good. Many health problems can be seen and treated early before an animal gets really sick. True or
True.
false?
True.
True. Good.
Number 1.
And that is it for tonight. If you guys would like a recording to this, you can leave your email, or if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. I'll stick around for a little while. And I might be able to answer them tonight, or I might send you an email with the answer. If not, thank you guys so much for coming. Be sure to make sure you signed in so you get credit for coming tonight. And it was great to see you all. Have a good night.
How do we sign in?
How do we register that we were here tonight?
You can put your name and what county you're from in the chat box. As far as I know, we are still planning on having fair, Bryce. I will definitely email a hard copy. And I was hoping y'all would be on tonight 'cause I had a couple questions about what you're looking for. You had asked about how to prevent diarrhea in calves, and so that can be different depending on the age of the calf and what you're feeding. And so if you could give me a little bit of background information, that'll help me be able to better answer your question.
You know that. Thank you.
Okay, so grass hay and corn, about 1,000 pounds. And is it really super watery or just loose stool?
Yeah. Is it super watery? Ah, nice. Yeah. Right.